Alright, so of course, Miss Bala came out this weekend, but given the freezing temperatures and the shitload of snow we just got, I figured it'd probably be best if it was more of a Netflix weekend. Not that I had interest in Miss Bala anyway. But I did have a lot of interest in the movie that was just released today to Netflix, so I figure I'll do that and a couple that came out earlier this month. So, yes, obviously I want to start with Velvet Buzzsaw. The new Dan Gilroy movie, who had previously worked with both Jake Gyllenhaal and Rene Russo on Nightcrawler, and then last year, I guess in 2017, was responsible for Roman J. Israel Esquire. And now he's back to more of a territory that feels much more in like the Nightcrawler vein. It was Roman J. Israel Esquire does like there's a certain feel to him there, but you can tell that it seems like kind of an outcast when you put these two movies on each side of it. So if that's more in line with what you want to get out of him, you may be into this, you may not. I'm not really sure. But I will say immediately that I have been saying, at least for a couple of years now, with all the, supernatural, ghost-type horror movies we've been getting, I've been kind of begging for a comeback for the slasher genre. And this is kind of somewhat the best of both worlds, in a way. And not, it definitely one of the most unexpected ways I expected to get that wish fulfilled, but here we are. So, when Gilroy went into this, there was apparently what he wanted to do, besides do some sort of weird-ass horror movie in the art world, also wanted to do something along the lines of what Robert Altman did with The Player. Not just, taking jabs at a certain industry in a kind of satirical way, but also having it be like a big ensemble piece. So there's a lot of different characters that we sort of bounce around with, even similar like long takes where we kind of in one take will like bounce around from one person to another and so on. And while it does have a relatively impressive cast, obviously Jake Gyllenhaal's art critic is kind of at our center of this. I can't tell if he's at the center of the story or if it just feels like he's the center because it's Jake Gyllenhaal. But it does seem like his character is the type of character and has the sort of profession that the movie's kind of going after, in a way. So, when you look at it like that and you see the world that it's set in and the kind of approach that Gilroy clearly wanted to take, it is one of those things where I'm wondering how people are going to take to it because it seems to kind of go along with not just its characters, but the territory that the movie like has a sort of intentional pretension to it. Almost like obviously it's clearly doing some sort of satirical thing, but it's also like Gilroy's really walking a tightrope between like unintentional pretension and it just kind of I could easily buy a lot of people dismissing this movie and saying the movie itself is pretentious, but and I wouldn't necessarily dismiss that opinion either, but I do think there's something sort of clever he's doing by intentionally going in that direction. But that's another thing that might make it a bit, especially being about the art world, might make it susceptible to maybe possibly over-analysis, because I kind of caught myself doing it, and I don't know if that's the intention or not. There's a very early scene where Rene Russo and David Diggs are having a conversation, and the title gets dropped, and we learn what exactly it is, at least within the confines of the story. I mean, and I kind of found myself like dissecting every single line she said because the second I heard the title dropped, it was like, now is everything she says about that, which is an art piece she did forever ago, gonna kind of mirror the movie itself? Is what I kind of thought was gonna be happening. Because the first thing she says is they say is like the name was catchy, and it's like that could be a bit of something self-congratulatory in regards to Gilroy, but at the same time, like I said, it just kind of feels like the purpose too. Because he talks about how after she did that, she kind of delved into self-parody. So I was thinking like, is the movie gonna start being self-parody, and all that? But like I said, maybe I was just overthinking it too much because I was overthinking it, but at the same time taking it at surface level because of the territory itself. So when you get there, though, like I said, who seems to be the center is Gyllenhaal, and the way his character interacts, not just with the people around him, but the artwork he comes across also, and it's like you see this character, and you can tell, like, the thing I should probably put the rest pretty quickly is the fact that when I say it's sort of, apparently Gilroy's point was to basically show just how much, really goes into a piece of art, and that kind of have it critiqued as sort of like almost a cheap way to take that away from somebody that's created something. But it's not like, it doesn't really have like a fuck you critics vibe that you might think that suggests. At least going in, like, there's not like this sort of petty bitterness that you might think would go along with that. But it is interesting to watch the Gyllenhaal character and the way he's portrayed, where it's at the same time it feels like this is absolutely could be a guy that's in this world, but he also feels over the top at the same time. And it's one of those cases where, like, even when he's, he could either be seducing a woman or he could be at a funeral and he's speaking like a critic, like, all the time, and just kind of critiques everything around him. And there is something sort of, like, darkly comedic to that, and that's certainly kind of a tone the movie kind of takes on, kind of wants to take on, but there's still plenty of characters to go around here, like, actually, really, instead of going to the other characters, really more so the setting is what stands out more than everybody else. I mean, obviously, we do have a big cast with, like, I mentioned Rene Russo and David Diggs. There's also, like, Toni Collette and Tom Sturridge, John Malkovich, a number of recognizable faces. But the way the world is kind of depicted, though, is what really stands out more than anything else. And not just the art world either, like, just kind of the LA setting in general, because obviously he played that up nicely in Nightcrawler, but there's also something here where it's like, it also sort of gives me not that the movie feels like a Michael Mann movie, but sort of the same sort of love in the way they show LA kind of reminded me of Mann a little bit, particularly there'll be some scenes where it's like somebody walks outside in the evening and it's like you can actually like smell the air practically. And then there's other times where we get like these enormous sort of overhead shots. Sometimes even there's one that's even like above the clouds, that just kind of gives us that full view. And the way it sort of just embraces the entire world and not just the art world the characters are set in, it sort of really says something about how much he's able to sort of build this around everything. And another thing I was talking about in regards to, it seems like he's going into certain directions intentionally that might otherwise be criticized. Like, it's obviously a very hard movie to pick apart given what it goes after, but it's like, you have moments where obviously it's doing a bit of a horror thing, but then there's like a scene where there is a jump scare that ends up just being a cat. And obviously that's like for the longest time the jump scare was literally just called the "it's only a cat" scare, because it used to almost always be just a cat jumping out that was a false scare. And the fact that he actually puts that in here within, the rest of the story and what's already been established, it makes perfect sense to just take that as it's totally intentionally going that cliche route. As it sort of like is. I mean, I guess at the same time, if it's taking a dig at horror while also portraying it in a certain way, you could say this is, something we've never seen before, or this is something we have seen before, but at the same time, go back to that scene at the beginning where Rene Russo is talking about her art, and she even says, the art world, there's nothing new anymore, everything is the same. So I guess it's like he covers all of his bases at the same time, even if you wanted to take it in that direction, it kind of feels like he's a bit ahead of you. It's just a matter of how well you can do that, and for the most part, there are plenty of directors that have done stuff like this and failed miserably, but I think he actually pulls it off here pretty well. And there's even stuff like I was talking about, like the seemingly intentional pretension, even when it gets to certain, like, I guess, intentional arty shots. Like, there's a point in time where the camera's going through a crowded art gallery while this thing is going on, and the camera seemingly goes through a champagne glass, like, just because. And so that kind of stands out in that way also, where it's like he could be, in that sort of area. But overall, it just it is what's great about this movie is it, despite seemingly taking some certain influences, like Man, for instance, or Altman, as he said himself, but there was also oh God, what was I saying? Oh yes, another vibe I was getting, where it's also kind of a bit of a horror story in the art world, was also kind of reminding me of Personal Shopper, from a couple of years ago, which to me is definitely a compliment. It was one of my favorite movies of that year. I was definitely kind of getting a vibe of it also, but there's something so original about its premise. It's something that I can't imagine trying to explain to somebody, like what exactly happens in it. And I don't know what exactly is saying too much. I have heard a complaint when the first trailer was released that a lot of people thought the trailer might have been too revealing, so I'm not quite sure what it showed, but I hope not too much, because this goes in these the directions that this goes in are like so bizarre and like unexpected, and that's I mean, sometimes it's so bizarre and unexpected, I'm not entirely sure that it works, particularly when some of the more supernatural elements are like actually seen on screen as opposed to implied. Like if it had sort of implied all that stuff but actually not shown us stuff as literally as they do most of the time, it would have come off more like something like Personal Shopper, and may possibly have been something that I took to a little more, even though I did take to this pretty well. But at the same time, it actually does start to work in its favor during the climax. Like, the more they show, the more just fucking insane and unimaginable the movie becomes. And I can really see people just absolutely hating this. I really can. And that's what's so interesting, the idea of putting it on Netflix. I mean, because so far, Gilroy's other two movies have gotten, wide mainstream releases. But I mean, being on Netflix in particular means that a lot of people are going to see this. Even if they turn it off like 15 minutes, a lot of people are at least going to get a taste of it. And I imagine many, 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 many regular Netflix viewers are not going to get all the way through this. I can't imagine that. But and that's not even to say, that's not to go towards that pretension and say they're not going to necessarily get it. I could just see a lot of people not being into this. But like if you like stick with it, and there are stretches where it might seem like it's a bit directionless, or a bit too dry, or not really going anywhere, it's going somewhere. It's definitely going somewhere, and whether you want to stick around for that is up to the person. But yeah. So like it's once again, especially the climax. I can't even imagine explaining this to somebody, or attempting to. Um, so yeah, but that's pretty much what it is. Like I said, on the surface, it might seem like it's trying to do like a "fuck you, critics" kind of thing, and that's kind of what the seemingly the setup was. But I do think there's more to it than that. And if it is in there, it's in there in a way that isn't too off-putting. Um, in a way, sort of like when Kevin Smith made Yoga Hosers, and it was so clearly he was like basically throwing a tantrum at his critics, past and present. But this is, yeah, and Gilroy mostly makes critically acclaimed movies, so it's not like he'd have like a huge, backing to do something like that. But there's still going to be, if you're a creative person, there's one or two little negative things that are said about you that'll eat away at you just forever, and just completely tear apart what you worked so hard to build. But and it's clear that's what he's going for. But the fact that he was able to do it in such a crazy ass, creative and interesting way, really says something. But as I said, I can definitely tell this isn't going to be everybody's thing. But I am extremely curious to find out what the rest of the world thinks. So, especially since it's so accessible to like everybody. So that'll be interesting to see. So next we're gonna go on to Polar. Polar, you might also know it under its other title, perhaps, Trying Too Hard, the movie. So this is apparently a graphic novel, which is not surprising to learn. And because of that, like so I heard that it was a movie where Mickelson was playing an assassin. It was based on a graphic novel. It was like I feel like there's something to this. Like there could be something really cool and like you know I'm, most of the movies I would say like I was kind of like saying oh if it's like this it'll be great. They are seems like they're trying to be those movies and the movie turned out the way it did. So I'm kind of jumping around that, but. Yeah, and then so I looked and saw the absolutely terrible reviews it's getting, which usually doesn't faze me too much, but like as soon as I saw a movie like this had terrible reviews before I even started it, my first thought was, this is gonna have like that really shitty straight to video kind of like a lot of flashy strobe like editing, isn't it? just immediately that's the first thing that comes to mind before I even turn it on. And yeah, we're met with that pretty quickly and frequently throughout, as he has like memory flashes, and it's like just all the bad movies in the world have that at some point. Um, and not to mention it's from the director of Spun, the meth movie with Jason Schwartzman, which does have a cult following for sure, but I absolutely fucking hate it. So once again, not a very surprising thing to learn once you've seen the movie. As this begins, it does start off as sort of like a half Smokin' Aces, half Smokin' Aces by way of Crank, I guess you could say. This opening with Johnny Knoxville, um, where we're introduced to the other assassins in the movie that have the same boss as Mickelson's character. But this opening is like we get stuff like Earth, Wind, and Fire September is playing, and after they've done the job and they're flying off, we get some of the lyrics to September on the screen with a bouncing ball as the characters sing it, and there's a boner joke. So there'll probably be people like defend this and say, hey, it's supposed to be like a graphic novel, don't you know? But I don't want to judge the graphic novel without having seen or laid eyes on it, but if this is the kind of stuff that it is, God help whoever thought it was a good idea to adapt it to screen. So you look at this though, and you see that opening, and it kind of gives you an idea. Like even if it doesn't seem very good, you'd think it would be tone setting, but there's a lot of tones going on, and that's not a good thing. So you've got this whole thing with Mickelson coming in, where it's like he's in seemingly some spy movie, or what a teenager writing a script for the first time would think a spy movie looks like on paper. So you got him like walking in, and he meets the woman, and he's already got the drink for her, and the woman's like, "Oh, this is my drink. You remembered." And then it's like it's like some teenager watched a Bond movie and thinks this is what sounds smooth and cool and shit like that. And eventually it gets to the supporting cast with the other assassins like Catherine Winnick and all them. I don't know if it's an acting thing or if I should put it on the writing or the direction they got or what, but I almost want to feel bad for them because they were basically made to humiliate themselves, whether it be with these performances, with this dialogue, with whatever the hell. It was like, try to be as cool as possible. Catherine Winnick might as well, half her dialogue might as well have been her saying, I am such a villain. And it's really, it's really agonizing to watch. So, but there was one very satisfying moment, though, when she is talking to Mickelson on the phone relatively early, and it's like she's talking on the phone and she's trying to be like all smooth and talk like she's basically talking out of a script, basically. And it's like she's giving this really embarrassing performance, trying so hard to be cool and so villainy, and Mickelson just hangs up on her in like mid sentence. It's like, yes, okay, so maybe they're self-aware, and they're not. They're not at all, because the performances remain like that throughout. This was just the one time early on in the movie they were smart enough to cut it off before it got even worse. And so, Mickelson then leaves this and goes into what is apparently an entirely different movie. A very sort of slow burn movie about a soon-to-be retired assassin who's approaching his birthday. And he's, out in the snow, and he's by himself, and he's living the loner life. He buys a dog. Insert tired Keanu Reeves reference here. quickly dies because, and that went nowhere. That's like in the first 10 minutes or so. He buys a dog just for it to die, but it's not like a John Wick thing or anything like that. It just, like, dies. And never mentioned again, really. So, but then eventually he runs into his neighbor Vanessa Hudgens, and a sort of bond happens. Because when you look at an actor like Mickelson, your first thought is like, oh, this dude is, like, one of the best working right now, and he can put so much into a performance, just command the screen in a way we hardly ever see anymore. It's like, if you had to put a name next to this guy on a poster, who of all the people working in the industry right now would you like to see him work with? Apparently somebody raised their hand first and said Vanessa Hudgens. So we got that. And the Hudgens character is like, she's gonna be one of those characters that has a certain quirk to her. So it's like, she's really jumpy. Like, there's one scene where a door opens and she jumps and knocks a shelf over. And then a second scene happens where something else not that big happens and she jumps again, and it's like, oh, I've never seen a movie in my entire life. I wonder if this means something about her character and her past, and if we're going to get that in a long, drawn-out 10-minute scene of her just telling us her damn backstory, but being a little bit cryptic about it, too, in case there's something they want to reveal later. I don't know. So, I was talking about the employer that all the assassins share, and that is a really oddly cast Matt Lucas as, I guess, our head villain, if you want to call him that. And he's doing the over-the-top thing. I kind of want to commend him, but at the same time, it's like everybody but Mickelson's just sort of embarrassing themselves on this, especially when they try to go really over the top, especially when you're comparing that to the side of the movie that Mickelson's in, that there's nothing like this whatsoever. So you've got basically this, old aging assassin thing going on, and it's like once he reaches his 50th birthday, they make you retire and they give you a shitload of money and all that, but Matt Lucas is doing something real shady that's gonna make all shit break loose. And then on the other side, we keep cutting back to these other assassins who wear, like, I was talking about the drab setting with the snow and the dark clothing and everything's just, it's like they kept this. Netflix kept the set from Hold the Dark with Jeffrey Wright and just put Mickelson in there. But then on the other side, we got the other assassins who think they're in a Neville Dean and Taylor movie, who basically run around in, like, colorful outfits, killing obese people in really graphic and bloody ways, trying to be funny. There is one particular moment that really played this up, where it's like 1 minute you got Mickelson, like, being, his lonely self, confiding in Vanessa Hudgens, finding a possible connection with someone for the first time in his life or whatever. And then you interrupt this scene to cut to the assassins in a motel room where there is one guy who is waiting for one of the other guys to get out of the bathroom and stop banging the blue-haired junkie that he's in there with, so that guy can go in there and take an on-screen shit. Just for us to cut back to the Mickelson stuff. And these scenes are, like, intertwining with themselves for some reason. If you can think of a reason for two scenes like that to have some sort of connection that we have to cut back and forth between the two at once, I would like to know what drugs you're on, quite honestly. So, because that doesn't add up at all. And obviously when you talk about the violence, obviously there is a shitload of it, but a lot of it is like sort of Matthew Vaughn style CGI blood. But the difference in Matthew Vaughn movies like Kingsman or Kick-Ass is that the action scenes are well executed enough that, at least to me anyway, the CGI blood doesn't really matter too much. You just see it shoot real quick and then it's gone. But the style of the action scene and everything else about it and the way it's, choreographed and all that is what's standing out to you. And the blood might as well hardly be there. Just enough to show you that it exists in this movie. And it's like, it indicates that a character is probably dead. And that's all it needs to serve its purpose for. But the problem is that this movie's action scenes aren't like that. So all you're paying attention to is, wow, this looks horrible and fake and all that. and I guess every now and then there is something that's like maybe mildly effective, but the rest of the movie is so bad. I almost think some of the more effective moments, not only are they so brief, but may have well even been accidental. Because then they're just really quick to bog it down with, the word that kept coming to mind was immaturity to this movie. Especially by the time it got to, like, I was already thinking that, and then we got to the sex scene. And this sex scene has, like, the cinematic integrity of the sex scene in the Happy Time Murders. It is fucking ridiculous, and even if that is the point, it still doesn't work. It's still embarrassing for everyone involved, especially the people that made it. And so eventually we get to the movie's about 2 hours, so when we're nearing the hour and a half point, the movie runs out of ideas and decides to give us like a 15-minute torture scene. Because they're like, hey, remember what you did in Casino Royale? Well, we're going to do that to you too, only it's going to be like really, really bloody and really, really long and shit. It may even be the same setting once again. So, but once we get there, there is a scene that follows this that is a seemingly endless scene of Nicholson killing people. But I'm not as quick to criticize that as I am the torture scene, because this scene where Mickelson kills all these people is basically what we've been waiting the whole movie for, because it's been built up and built up and built up how, amazing of an assassin this guy is, how much of a killing machine he once was, or whatever. And we're only kind of seeing the more, slowing down peaceful side of him for most of the movie. So now we've got to get to this point where we get to see the person that he was, like, come back out of him to save his own life. But the thing is the movie's just been so exhausting up to this point, exhaustingly bad and other things, that's just not there. Like, it just feels like it's really dragged out, and it's just faceless bodies going down and blood going everywhere, but for what purpose, it doesn't matter by this point at all. So, there's that. And then, by the time we get to the end, they throw in a little twist that I kind of alluded to earlier, but the thing is that this is one of those twists where not only does it pretty much just, the movie just ends right after it's revealed, but what it is also, and the result of it is just like, so fucking what? It's like, I could tell you were hiding something, but it's like, I probably could have guessed what that was, but, I kind of thought you'd do something with it, but I guess not. But the movie was merciful enough to at least end, so I guess I can't fault it too much for stopping there, because it could have been worse. It could have gone a little longer, but thankfully it did not. So, yeah. So, there's definitely something in that concept, certainly with the casting of Mickelson, but just every time it could have done something, it just failed miserably. But like I said, every now and then there's only one moment where you're like, oh, this probably could have been a good movie in another lifetime, or another universe, or whatever the hell, but it's certainly not the one I just saw, so there's that. So let's end on The Last Laugh. Something I didn't know about until I just kind of saw it on Netflix, like saw the picture, and was like, what the hell is this? It's Richard Dreyfuss and Chevy Chase. And obviously I don't go to Netflix that frequently, mostly just for the stuff they put out, just to do this, or out of morbid curiosity, but obviously there's the whole thing of I can never quite tell what's a TV show and what's a movie. So I had to like look it up first to make sure what exactly it was, and it was like, so this is the interesting thing here, just right off, it stars two actors that have infamous reputations of not getting along with anybody they've ever worked with, pretty much. So that in itself kind of caught my attention, and the fact that I just really love Richard Dreyfuss, and he's been getting he's in Polar. He's in Polar for like 30 seconds and does something really crucial, and then disappears for the rest of the movie. But apart from that, also, I've just generally felt like lately he's just not getting the work he deserves. Because obviously he's aged pretty poorly. He had a pretty rough go of it with the drugs and the alcohol there for a long time, and it like really caught up to him in a bad way. He's looked like he's been pushing 90 for the past 20 years, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but he's clearly still got plenty of talent in him. He's always been an incredible actor to me, especially an incredible comedic actor, which makes him a really kind of great casting choice to see him in a role like this, where he gets to be the lead, he gets to play a comedic character, but he also gets, you know, a drama angle. He really needed a part like this. What he doesn't need is a movie like this, so he's got that going against him. But yeah, so and about the whole age thing, it's like it is also interesting to me that both actors are two actors that have aged pretty poorly. And Dreyfuss is playing a guy that has supposedly been retired from the comedy profession for 50 years. And it's like 50 years ago, Richard Dreyfuss himself had like barely started his career. And so, and the fact that also his agent is played by Chevy Chase, it's like, I'm not really quite sure. For the longest time, anyway, I wasn't quite sure how old they were supposed to be. Apparently, it's revealed towards the end, apparently Dreyfuss is supposed to be 80. Despite the fact that he's like 71 in real life. Like I said, looks older than both of those. But the talent is still there. The charisma is definitely still there. Just as I knew it would be if he was finally given a part like this again. But, like I said, it's the sort of movie that they're stuck in. Because movies like, one of the first things it reminded me of was The Last Movie Star, the Burt Reynolds' Swan Song that came out last year. And it was also kind of reminding me of another, you know, old people movie from whenever it was, just getting started. The Tommy Lee Jones Morgan Freeman movie that was in theaters for like 3 days, and then everybody forgot about it because nobody cared. And it is about as good as you would expect given that. So it's, because the thing about these sort of, you know, these movies that are about, like, you know, the old people still got it movie, where the people that make these movies are, more often than not, nobodies. I mean, I know, like, you know, I know who Adam Rifkin is and who Ron Shelton is, talking about those last two movies, but for the most part, you see a lot of these movies, and it's like, they just cast the old people, the old actors that everybody knows from back in the day, and they're basically think their job is done at this point. They don't really do anything else apart from that. And they're just like, oh, we'll just run the camera, let them do their thing, and the magic will happen. But that's when you realize, when you watch movies like this, that there's clearly much more to it than just that. As great as Dreyfuss is here, I do think the movie definitely should have been, like, I mean, this movie wants to do, like, you know, certain reveals about him as it goes on, but even so, I feel like the movie should have kind of started with Dreyfuss, but it actually starts with Chevy Chase and kind of makes him the main character before he inevitably meets Dreyfuss again, having been his manager 50 years ago. Because the thing about Chevy Chase here is, I don't know if he just, like, doesn't give a shit anymore, which is very likely. He was also in The Last Movie Star with Burt Reynolds, go figure. But he's definitely not really on the same platform here as Dreyfuss is, because then you can sense that in between them. Like, I don't know if it was like a lack of chemistry between them in general or what, but it's like, you never quite get the feel, like the way these guys really know each other, and that mainly comes from, what Chase is kind of lacking here, because there's one moment towards the beginning where Chevy Chase is like building up that Dreyfuss is like was one of the funniest comedians of all time, one of the funniest people he ever knew in his entire life, and that's who he built his short career out of. But so Dreyfuss makes this joke where they're in like a retirement home, and Chevy Chase talks about the old people here, and Dreyfuss leans in and says, "You don't say old here, that's offensive. We prefer the term pre-dead." And the way Chevy Chase laughs at this joke, and then reassures his granddaughter this was the funniest guy of all time. It is like one of the least genuine laughs I have ever heard, and that happens throughout. And at first I was like, oh, is there a riff in their character? And it's like, oh no, Chevy Chase just did not sell that laugh at all. And stuff like that can just really break this down when that's what these whole characters' friendships like rest on. And so it's clear also that Chase seemed to be having a bit of trouble with the banter. That or it was poorly written or poorly directed, because they'd be like, you know, you could tell there was supposed to be like a back and forth between the way they're talking and everything. But then it was almost like there were times where he was almost stepping on Dreyfuss's lines, like he was saying his shit a little too early. And it just kind of really broke what seemed to be supposed to be a flow here. And it just, like I said, and it would just kind of kill scenes, like, entirely, and they would just feel off for the rest of the time. And yeah, there was just something not particularly genuine about Chase's character, and I think that kind of has to do with I don't know, because there's even a point in time where it's like, he kind of goes on a very brief, yet somewhat passionate tirade about his old career, and it's like, the fact that he's aging, and it's like, this feels like it could have been coming from, like, a real place, but it's just not there, though. Like, the punch is not there at all, and you can sense, like, the vague outline of that, but it just eventually, it stops way before it ever gets to the point it probably should be at. So that's kind of unfortunate, and the jokes throughout the movie also, I mean, it's exactly the kind of stuff you'd expect in a road movie about old people being old people, and that's the joke. But every now and then there's certain jokes, particularly, like, when he's actually doing the comedy scenes, Dreyfuss is. Like, there's a very early scene when he goes out for the first time, and this is really a testament to how well Dreyfuss was making this character work, despite this writing, and that was, he's immediately getting heckled, and he hasn't done this for 50 years, and you're, like, kind of afraid it's going to do the thing where he's going to get, discouraged and all that, but because of Dreyfuss and the way he plays the character, we're, like, genuinely rooting for him, and it's really satisfying when he, puts the heckler in his place, as opposed to, tucking his tail between his legs and leaving. We actually, not just because it would keep it from descending into cliches, but also we really wanted the guy to succeed, for sure. And then there's a joke, this is actually something I've heard some comedians and other people actually talk about, and that's the whole thing of when they go to Mexico, and while he's doing his act, there's an interpreter there interpreting his jokes, and there's, like, the whole thing where he has to say his joke and then wait, and then the interpreter says it, then they laugh, and he gets irate because the interpreter's getting his laughs. Stuff like that is actually funny, but then most of the movie, though, is, like, old people are old people getting... There's so fucking many jokes of old people getting high is hilarious. There's a whole... Especially when they meet Andie MacDowell, who comes in and is basically the girl that gets between them, and... could be, Chase's chance to, get back on the horse or whatever, but, by the way, is totally directionless in the long run, it turns out, and pointless. But while she's here, she brings mushrooms with her. Like, it's one thing that Dreyfuss has been trying to get high the whole movie, and then she's like, hey, I've got mushrooms. So we are treated to a very long sequence, very long, towards the final third of the movie, of Chevy Chase being high on mushrooms, and it's like a whole hallucinatory thing, and it feels like it goes on for fucking ever, like forever and ever, which is obviously really taking focus away from the Dreyfuss character, who is so much more sympathetic and so much more interesting. Not only do I think Chase's performance is kind of doing this in a little bit, and his character's just not near as interesting, but his character is also not all that sympathetic. He seems like really selfish a lot of the time, and I'm not quite sure if that's the point or not, but it's... Yeah, and anything it does to disrupt the story, just... Like I said, I really feel like the Dreyfuss character should be this kind of almost the sole thing here, and Chase would be like a sort of a supporting player. Obviously, he's got to be prominent, but should have been much more in a supporting angle to the Dreyfuss character, who should have definitely been out front most of the time. Also would have avoided the very pointless potential love story thing, or whatever the hell that was supposed to be, whatever. And overall, on top of all that, it just definitely feels, like, really disjointed. Like I said, the way it just seems like they basically let the camera roll and hope the actors would bring the magic themselves. And there's continuity mistakes all over the place, which is something you wouldn't normally notice. It sounds really nitpicky, but like I said, it just really... just added to the whole, wow, they just threw this together, hardly any thought. There's even a point in time when I felt like a scene was missing. Like, I actually felt like my computer messed up or something, because it's him and Dreyfus walking around in Mexico, and they walk up to like two Navy guys or something, and Dreyfus is like, "Hey, you guys are American. You know any places have a good time around here?" And then it just cuts suddenly to them in jail, and Dreyfus is sitting down, and he's like covered in puke, and Chase is trying to get somebody's attention, and the reason Dreyfus is apparently puked is because he said, "Hey, you shouldn't have drank the water because we're in Mexico." And it was like, hold on, there's something happened in between now and here, and maybe obviously, clearly, apparently that's the joke, because it's like, oh, whatever they got into led them to this, but I mean, what is there even to, what is the payoff? Like, we're looking at the payoff, so where's the goddamn joke? Like, at least see them go in a direction or something. The scene cut with Dreyfus asking what they could do. I guess we're supposed to assume, oh, whatever they did got them in jail and Dreyfus is puking everywhere, but there's something missing here that's going to make this funny, apparently, but I don't think they cared, so that's pretty much what this is. And then, of course, it goes into your natural, predictable, more dramatic elements. The dramatic elements you would expect from a movie about old people, particularly one that has a certain goal in his life, all that stuff, where they just really shoehorn Chris Parnell into this to just kind of materialize at the most convenient time, in the most convenient place. I don't know. The movie is not really trying very much, but for Dreyfus alone, I was really hanging on to it as much as I possibly could. So he's the reason that I'm not, like, just totally trying to tear it apart as much as I can. Even if that's what it sounds like. I could probably go into more. But I do really wish Dreyfus could still get parts like this where he's, like, front and center and can really go for his strengths. I mean, even The Goodbye Girl, the movie he won his Oscar for, is a hilarious performance. His performance in What About Bob, for my money, is one of the funniest performances of all time in movie history. Not even joking. And so, yeah, that's what they had, and this is the movie we got. So that's just pretty unfortunate. So, and like I said, if Chase was more like, sort of the way he was in his prime, God, I can only imagine how the magic they would have had bouncing off each other, even especially if they hated each other in real life. I don't know, but supposedly Dreyfus hated Bill Murray when they made What About Bob, so maybe they bonded over their hatred for Bill Murray or something. I don't know, but I wasn't really getting a vibe between the two of them as far as a decades-long friendship is supposed to look like, but. Yeah, so it's just there, as I pretty much expected it would be, but I was kind of hoping to be a bit surprised, but I'm not. So that's what Netflix has to offer. There's like a couple more in there, but these are the only ones I was really that concerned about. So next week, is that the Lego movie, maybe? And that Liam Neeson movie, and that horror movie, I guess. So all of that stuff, and we're going to keep doing versus stuff and award stuff and all of that. So I am done with this. So until all that stuff, that's it.